Mr. Graska.
Better.
Measure B. Should Measure B language be tightened to prevent catch-up developments after economic boom-bust cycles?
As I stated before already, I think that perhaps it should be revisited, and I don't honestly think catch-up is what the intent of the citizens had when they enacted Measure B and they voted on it. This whole thing with you didn't use the allotment, so I guess we get to, add it on later. I don't think that was the original intent. The other interesting fact of the matter is that our growth doesn't match Measure B. And I think our real growth is actually about 1-2%. And in revisiting Measure B, we should make it appropriate to what our growth is and what the citizens want for real growth. And I don't believe in catch-up.
Ms. Koppas?
When I was on the General Plan Advisory Committee, there was a few meetings dedicated just to Measure B, and there was a lot of discussion about Measure B and about catch-up development. And I think that with Measure B, one example is there was one person who stood up and said, I was there and I was on the committee that made a decision on Measure B, and this is what Measure B was in the spirit of. And that person sat down, and then someone else stood up and said, I was there, I was involved in making the decision in Measure B, and they're completely wrong. It's this. And so it's hard to say that this is what the spirit is of Measure B. I think that the idea that the catch up, that we're going to come out of the recession and everyone's going to suddenly build 1 million houses is ridiculous, and it's not fiscally possible. And I don't think that putting that catch-up development is something that is really possible to happen. If it grows over time and with the allotments, it's really, and grows the allotments, I just think that, in the end, I just don't think that ridiculous amount of growth for the catch-up development is really possible.
Mr. Besney?
Thank you. Well, unlike my colleagues on the dais tonight, I happened to live here when Measure B was originally enacted, and I remember when it was enacted, and I remember why it was enacted, and those of you who were here then will remember that a developer from San Francisco bought a bunch of property up on Highway 505 where Heinz Nursery now sits, and was going to build a town called Manzanita. And the citizens of Solano County were really upset, and they put a measure on the ballot called Measure A, and that was intended to protect farmland and open land, and it passed, and Mr. Wu took his signs with his beautiful pictures of the town of Manzanita down, and the citizens of Dixon decided that they needed to have a measure to protect growth. So we had Measure B, a 3% growth. It rarely, if ever, was met. I don't think it should be changed. I don't think the catch-up should be eliminated. I think to the extent that it's viable, it has worked, but I don't actually think that it's necessary. We've never really exceeded it, and it's never really, except for maybe a couple of years, had a true impact on growth in the city because of the lack of interest, and in this day and age, the lack of money and development in and of itself.